I used to think love meant staying, even when it hurt, even when it silenced me. Not all family deserves your suffering. Some wounds come from blood, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away.
This isn't a story of hate. It's a story of boundaries, of healing, of one man choosing to protect his soul, even from those who helped shape it. Here are 6 behaviors you must never accept again, no matter who they come from. They said it was for my own good. Their words wore smiles like masks, polite, caring, wise. But somehow, every time they spoke, I felt smaller. They weren't yelling. They didn't need to. All they had to do was tilt their head, sigh, and say, "That's not realistic," or "You're being too emotional again." And I'd shrink, just enough to doubt myself again. It took me years to realize what I was calling love was actually slow erosion. And here's the worst part. I thought they were right, because I had learned from childhood that love often sounded like correction, that the people who raised me rarely praised, but always warned. And I mistook fear for care. My father used to say, "Don't dream too big. You'll only get disappointed." I thought he was protecting me, but he was only passing down his own disappointment, wrapped in fatherly concern. So when my partner did the same, laughed when I spoke about starting my own business, rolled her eyes when I read philosophy, said, "That's just a phase," I didn't rebel. I listened. And every time I listened, I disappeared just a little more. That's the poison of disguised control. It doesn't demand your obedience. It makes you question your truth. Until one day, you stop sharing your ideas altogether. Not because they forbid it, but because you've been trained to second-guess your own light. I remember the day it changed. I was sitting on a park bench with my mentor, a man who rarely spoke, but when he did, his words cracked through bone like lightning. I told him how confused I felt, how the people around me always seemed to know better, how I was tired of explaining myself, and he just nodded, then said, "If someone always makes you feel small after you speak, it's not because your ideas lack value. It's because their world is too small to hold your expansion." I sat there in silence, a silence that tasted like grief, because I realized I'd spent years trying to win the approval of people who were terrified of their own growth. From that day on, I stopped explaining. I stopped shrinking. I stopped mistaking criticism for love. And if you're still in that place, still doubting your voice because someone close to you wears the mask of advice, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not hard to love. You are just not easy to control anymore. And to the insecure, those two things look the same. There will be people who won't clap for your awakening. Not because you're wrong, but because your freedom exposes their cage. And instead of breaking their bars, they'll try to dim your fire. Don't let them. Walk away from conversations that cost your clarity. You don't owe anyone your shrinking. You don't need permission to shine. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and simply walk into your next chapter without turning around to prove anything. And when they call you cold, just smile gently, because they'll never understand the warmth it took to reclaim your peace. They said, "After everything I've done for you," and that's all it took. One sentence. And I folded. I had a plan. I had drawn a boundary, clear, kind, honest. But those words, they reached into my chest and twisted the part of me that still believed I owed them my peace, just because they were once there for my survival. That's how guilt is weaponized. not with shouting, but with quiet reminders of old sacrifices you never asked for, but still feel indebted to. And I won't lie to you. It works. Especially when you were raised to be the grateful one, the child who was always reminded of the roof above his head, the meals, the tuition, the clothes. What no one told me growing up was that real love doesn't keep score. Real love doesn't say, "I gave you life, now give me control." But I didn't know that. Not back then. So I bent, again and again, until the version of me that remained was quiet, agreeable, exhausted. I remember one night, after another guilt-laced conversation with my mother, I sat alone in the kitchen, lights off, staring at a half-eaten plate of food I didn't even remember preparing. And that's when I heard it again. The voice of my old mentor. His voice was like a whisper through the dark. He once told me, "Debt ends the moment love becomes a contract. You didn't ask to be born, but you get to choose how you live." It hit me so hard, because no one had ever said that to me before. We are taught to give, taught to repay, taught that being a good son means swallowing every piece of yourself just to keep the elders comfortable. But here's what I've learned. Gratitude and submission are not the same thing. You can honor someone's past effort without letting them own your future. And if right now you feel selfish for pulling away, if their sacrifices echo louder than your boundaries, let me remind you of this. There's a difference between love and leverage, between nurturing and control. If someone only reminds you of their love when you say no, that's not love. That's emotional debt collection. And you're not a debtor. You're a soul. You don't owe your exhaustion in return for their expectations. You don't owe your silence to keep old peace treaties alive. You can be grateful and still walk away. You can love them and still say, "This ends with me." And one day, if they ask why you've become distant, why you're no longer as available, why you've changed, you won't need to explain. Just smile gently and say, "Because I finally learned that love should feel like freedom, not pressure," and walk on. There's a strange moment that happens on the path of healing. You find your peace, and they start laughing. Not a loud laugh, not the joyful kind. It's the sideways smile, the raised eyebrow, the sarcastic, "Oh, you meditate now?" Or worse, "You've changed." I remember sitting in my brother's garage one summer. We were catching up. He opened a beer. I opened a book. He looked at the title, some Stoic Philosophy, and said, "Damn, you're turning into one of those YouTube monks." And then he laughed. The whole room laughed. But I didn't. Because what they called change was actually me coming back to myself. I used to joke too. I used to wear my pain like armor. Loud, reckless, numb. Because that's what we were taught. In our town, in our family, to be broken but funny, angry but silent, manly but empty. So when I started choosing silence, when I stopped yelling back, when I turned off the news and turned toward my own breath, they got uncomfortable. Not because I became someone else, but because I stopped being their mirror. That's the thing they don't tell you. People who are wounded together build a loyalty around pain. You break that pattern. They call it betrayal. But let me ask you something. Is it really betrayal to step out of the fire when no one else wants to leave? Or is it survival? Because I got tired of bleeding next to people who called it bonding. I got tired of shrinking just to make others feel unthreatened. I got tired of editing my dreams so they wouldn't feel like failures. And maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe you've started talking about self-worth, and someone rolled their eyes. Maybe you've started walking different, and someone said, "Who do you think you are?" And maybe, just maybe, you started wondering if they were right. Let me tell you what my mentor told me the night I almost gave up. Don't ever feel ashamed for choosing growth. The ones who mock your wings are the ones too afraid to fly. That hit me like thunder in the chest. Because I finally saw it. Their laughter wasn't about me. It was about them. Their stuckness, their stories, their fears. I wasn't too much. I was just too awake for their old narrative. So I kept going. I kept reading. I kept healing. And yes, I changed. But here's the truth. Growth isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And if your evolution makes them uncomfortable, good. That means it's working. Let them smirk. Let them laugh. Let them label your peace as weakness. But don't you dare go back to sleep just to make them feel safe. Because your light doesn't belong in the cage of their comfort zone. Walk tall. Breathe deep. And when they say, "You've changed," look them in the eye, smile, and say, "Yes, and I pray one day you will too." It's strange how healing triggers people. You'd think becoming calmer, softer, stronger would make them proud. But for some, your peace is their panic. I remember when I first started to heal, I was drinking less, meditating more, walking away from drama, speaking slower, breathing deeper. And I thought, finally, they'll see I'm better. But that's when it began. The sudden arguments, the emotional outbursts, the unexpected tears, always from them, never about me. They made sure every moment I stood in my power, they found a way to bleed louder. I didn't understand it at first. I blamed myself. Maybe I was cold. Maybe I wasn't being supportive enough. Maybe they needed more love. But here's what no one told me. Some people only feel significant when you're in pain with them. Your healing makes them irrelevant. And deep down, that terrifies them. Because if you no longer need rescuing, they lose their identity as your savior. If you no longer cry, they don't know how to connect. If you're no longer broken, their wounds feel louder by comparison. That's when I realized they didn't want me healed. They wanted me obedient, available, predictable, exhausted. So they picked the worst days to bring up old pain. They interrupted silence with noise. And every time I smiled, they reminded me who I used to be. It felt cruel. But in their world, it was survival. Because my light was shining on their shadows. And I get it now. When someone's entire life has been chaos, your peace feels like abandonment. But here's the truth. You are not responsible for someone else's refusal to grow. You don't have to shrink again just to keep the emotional balance. That's not loyalty. That's bondage. My mentor once told me, never let someone weaponize their pain to sabotage your freedom. And I never forgot that. Because there will always be someone who needs you to stay stuck so they can feel safe. But you didn't come this far just to relive the pain you outgrew. You came to break the pattern, to change the legacy, to choose softness over chaos, stillness over noise, truth over trauma. And if they can't meet you where you've risen, let them go where you left. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to argue or explain. You just need to protect what you've built. Because your peace is not public property. Let them bleed louder if they must. But you keep healing. They only say it when they want something. We're blood. That sentence, it doesn't show up on birthdays. or when you're quiet, or when you're breaking inside. It shows up when they need a favor, a loan, a ride, a sacrifice, and the moment you hesitate, they remind you. We're family. As if that word alone is supposed to erase your exhaustion. For years, I fell for it. Every time. Not because I was weak, but because I was conditioned. See, I grew up in a culture where blood was everything, where elders weren't questioned and silence was a virtue, where boundaries were betrayal and giving more than you had was the sign of a good son. So I kept giving, even when it hurt, even when I had nothing left, even when the people I gave to never once asked how I was doing. As long as I said yes, they stayed close. But the moment I said no, they disappeared. I remember the day it broke me. A cousin I hadn't heard from in 3 years suddenly messaged, "Hey bro, we're family, right? Can I borrow some cash?" And I said, "I'm not in a place to help right now." The next message? Nothing. Silence. Unfollowed. Gone. And I sat there, phone in hand, heart numb, wondering, was I ever family? Or just useful? That night, I asked my mentor a question I had never dared speak aloud. How do you love people who only show up when it benefits them? He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't call it love. You call it what it is, a transaction. And you stop paying the price for loyalty that isn't real." That truth shattered something in me. Because I realized, family isn't the ones who demand your sacrifice. Family is the ones who honor your soul even when you have nothing to give. And if you're still stuck in that guilt cycle where you give more than you receive, where you say yes out of fear, not love, let me say this to you plainly. You are allowed to say no even to people who share your DNA. You are allowed to rest even if they call you selfish. You are allowed to protect your peace even if they call it distance. They taught you blood is thicker than water. But they never taught you that blood can also drown you if you don't learn how to swim. And you've learned. So from here on, you give with clarity, not guilt. You show up with love, not obligation. You don't abandon them. You just stop abandoning yourself in their name. Because real family doesn't need to remind you that you're family. They prove it, even when they want nothing at all. They never bring up how far you've come, just how far you once fell. They don't talk about your healing. They talk about your mistakes. Your darkest chapter, played on loop, like that's the only story you ever wrote. I've heard it too many times to count. You used to be so reckless. Remember that time you lost everything? Or worse, I hope you're not going back to your old ways. And they say it with a smile, a casual shrug, as if pain becomes acceptable when it's dressed in nostalgia. But let me tell you what that really is. It's not memory. It's manipulation. It's a subtle reminder that you were once broken. And in their eyes, you still are. Because if they acknowledge how much you've grown, they lose control. They lose the version of you they could mock, manage, dismiss. So instead, they keep you caged in your past, with bars made of stories you've outgrown. I used to fight back, try to prove I'd changed, list my wins, justify my progress, until I realized you don't owe receipts for your redemption. One night, I called my mentor. I was drained, frustrated, hurt, and I asked, "Why do they always bring up who I used to be?" He paused, then said, "Because that version made them feel superior. Your healing makes them feel exposed." That truth struck me hard, because deep down, I knew they weren't attacking me. They were protecting their comfort. And my growth? It disrupted their illusion that people never really change. But Here's what I've learned. People who define you by your past are terrified of your future. Because if you can rise, then they can't use your scars as an excuse for their stagnation. And if you're hearing those same voices, the ones that drag you back into wounds you already sealed, let me offer this. You are not your worst season. You are not your lowest moment. You are not the sum of their selective memory. You are proof that brokenness is not the end, that resurrection is real, that light, once found, can never be unseen. You don't have to argue. You don't have to explain. Just keep walking. Because the ones who truly love you will honor your evolution, not just remember your collapse. And the ones who keep holding your past against you, they're already behind you. So let them whisper. Let them remind the world of who you were. And you show the world who you've become. In silence, in peace, in power. Leaving isn't betrayal. It's survival. You don't walk away because you hate them. You walk away because you love yourself enough to stop bleeding. But if one day your light grows strong enough, don't return to suffer again. Return to show them what healing looks like. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a word. It's a presence. It's the quiet man who came back, not to argue, but to set everyone free.
I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because I refused to inherit their pain. And when I returned, I didn't come back to argue. I came back with peace, to show them there's another way. That's how I honored my bloodline. Not by staying in silence, but by breaking the cycle. Move or die.